Welcome to Heart with Keisha B, the podcast that focuses on the journey of grief, healing, and overcoming unforeseen circumstances. Whether you're dealing with loss or life challenges, this is a podcast that you don't want to miss. I am your host, Keisha B. So take a deep breath, open your mind and your soul, and sit back as we embark on this journey together. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of Heart to Heart with Keisha B. As you know, the podcast that focuses on grief, healing, and overcoming unforeseen circumstances. And so if you are a new listener or a returning listener, we welcome you to this series of Heart to Heart with Keisha B. As you know, this is a podcast that is a little bit raw sometimes, definitely uncomfortable conversations. And so, as always, my guest is going to uplift you and inspire you. And today we have Holly, who is with us all the way from, hear me out now, she's all the way from Australia. So as you all know, I'm here in the United States. So it shows you how impactful that words from other people can be spread worldwide and still touch each and every one of us. And so today, Holly, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Keisha. Thanks for having me on.
You're more than welcome, Holly. As you hear me say, you know, I welcome you from the United States all the way abroad to Australia. And for those listeners, let me just share with you the dedication that we have here on this podcast. Here where I am, it is 9 p.m. Where Holly is, it is 9 a.m. So again, we are dedicated to bring change within each and every one of you all. And so, Holly, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to share a little bit with us about who is Holly, but more so, who was the little young lady, Holly?
I consider myself to have grown up in a normal childhood, whatever that means to people. My parents were quite wealthy. I used to go to an all-girls school. We lived in an affluent suburb here in Perth. My parents were running a real estate agency when I was younger. I can't remember what the reason was because I was young, but the real estate agency got shut down. When I was about 11, I remember that Mum and Dad started up an escort agency from the family home. In our family lounge room, there were 3 separate telephone lines. The girls who worked for Mum would start working from about 6 in the evening and could finish anywhere from 4 in the morning, 5, 6, depending on how busy it was. Due to having these phone lines ringing all night, it would be hard to explain to friends of mine who I would invite over after school. I would say, my parents run an import-export business, which would make that believable with time differences all over the world.
Right.
So I actually didn't have a lot of friends over for that reason. So, yeah, that was sort of the beginning of when things sort of went from being normal to a bit different. But having said that, that became my normal quite quickly. So to me, that was just our normal family life. Yeah.
You know, Holly, as you were talking, my brain began to go back into I'm going to call it my Rolodex, right? My memory Rolodex of what it was like for me as a young child growing up. And I'm going to use for my own self a dysfunctional home that I didn't realize was dysfunctional, right? Having a mother who regularly was either drunk or high on the drug of her choice. And what I found myself oftentimes doing was just like you. I couldn't really tell my friends what was going on in my home. I wouldn't allow my friends to come over. But what I found myself being was a liar, right? Not liar because it was fun, a liar to protect my truth inside of my home. So when I heard you speak of, you know, who you had to be or what you had to say your family was going through, it took me back to that young kid that was just my defense mechanism. Because at that time, you know, I don't want people to think I'm a liar today, so please hear me out. But at that time, I had to do whatever it took just not to expose my reality to other people. And so I so can relate to what you're saying.
And I was in the same boat, Keisha, you know. I'm not a liar either. I don't live every day lying to people. But you know, as a young child growing up, that's what you default to.
Right. So was there ever a time that as you was watching all of this, and again, I don't know if this is just something that we hear and see here in the United States, but were you ever in a situation where you were made to feel like you must stay in a child's place based upon all the adult things that were going on around you?
Funnily enough, no. Things took another turn when my parents decided to separate. My father was a very heavy drinker and he would become violent with my mum. Never in front of us kids. It was always behind closed doors, but we could hear what was going on. So, after, living like that for quite a while, they decided to separate and us kids had the choice of who we wanted to live with. My father was moving back over east, which was where he was from. None of us decided to go with him. My reason for not was he was a very strict guy. My mum wasn't. So, as a teenager, I wanted to be here with my friends, not have to move to school. I wanted my life as it was. And staying with mum allowed me to have a lot more freedom. In hindsight, I wish I had gone with my dad. My life would have probably turned out very differently, but I made my choice.
So, Holly, tell us about the difference of structure, right? Dad's discipline and a decision that you made to stay with mom. Take us through that life of what did that look like living in a home that wasn't as structured? Because as we all know, even though we all need discipline, sometimes as teenagers, we run away from it as far as we can. So tell us what that life looked like with you at home with mom.
So for me at home with mum, I could pretty much do what I wanted to do. There wasn't much in the way of boundaries, things like that. And one example I like to give people is all my girlfriends would always say, "Oh, Holly, you're so lucky. Your mum's so cool. I wish my mum was like that." And I would be so happy to hear that because that was the case.
Right.
But my mum and I had a more sisterly relationship, not a mother and daughter. I tell people, with your kids, have that boundary. You're the parent. Don't be their friend because being their friend just opens up the door to a lot of shit. I was going to nightclubs when I was 14 with my brothers and all his friends. I was drinking alcohol at 14. I was smoking cigarettes. I was smoking pot. And all that for me was my normal. And I loved living that life. I was having a ball.
As we talk about all the things that Holly knew was not normal, but became her normal, what does that turn into?
Yeah, so when I was about 14, 15, my mother met a guy who she started seeing. Oh, we all thought he was a really nice guy. We all liked him. It wasn't until a few months into their relationship that my mum found out he was a heroin addict and had been in prison for heroin offences. My mother had fallen in love with this guy. Eventually, my mother started using heroin. My mother was very wealthy. So I'm sure that the attraction to this guy was my mother's money. She started using. I was asking my mother very often, "Can I have a snort and try it?" And she always said no until one night she said yes. I had it. I loved it. I loved the feeling it gave me. And after that night, I continued using, but nobody knew that I had become a heroin addict.
So I'm going to ask this question because I'm interested to know this. So I'm sure our audience is interested to know this as well. How old were you at that time when you first tried heroin?
15 or 16.
Yeah.
Young.
I heard you say that you kept asking mom. Mom initially said no, and then mom said yes. How was it for you to accept no, being that you had been in a home that wasn't very structured?
Pissed off. This was something that was in the home. It was open. So I'm thinking, well, it must be okay because people are doing it. That was my mindset at that time.
I asked that because, again, far too often you made a good point in reference to mom wasn't a mom. Mom was a friend, right? And so I can see where the shift will be very tough when mom began to say things that most parents would say no, but that would be hard for a young person to internalize that because if all you heard was yes for so often and then finally you hear no, you're probably looking like, what the hell? Like, why not? You've let me do everything else, Did your siblings know any of this was going on?
No, nobody knew.
Wow.
As far as my mother was concerned, I'd had it that one time and never had it again. Nobody knew for a long time, probably for about a year and a half.
So take us to the point where heroin began to have more control over your life.
Heroin sort of didn't really become a large issue for me in that respect.
Okay.
It became an issue when I did a favour for a couple of people and I ended up in prison.
Do you mind sharing with us that part of your life?
Yeah, so I'd been with a guy, Stephen, since I was 16 years old. He was also a heroin addict. We knew a couple that wanted to do a run from Thailand. They knew that we knew people to buy heroin from them, and they asked us, could we help them to get it? We said, yeah, sure, no problem. So my husband flew over to Thailand. He went and got the heroin, gave it to them. Now, when this couple were coming back to Perth, I said, just ring me. I'll come and pick up the drugs from you. I will go and sell it, and I'll bring you back the money. Now, I was doing that purely as a favour. So, yeah, I've gone to their hotel to pick up the drugs. As I've gone outside to get into the lift, all these guys have run at me. So I didn't find out until about 3 days later that my so-called friends had been detained at the airport, taken to the hospital for x-rays, where they had found they had heroin internally. They asked, who are you doing this run for? And they said me, which was absolute bullshit.
Right.
But they said, okay, if you help set her up, you'll get a reduced sentence from the judge. And that's what happened. When I went to pick up the drugs from the hotel room, there was a cop hiding in the cupboard recording our whole conversation. From that, I went to jail when I was 20. Yeah.
Was the availability of drugs accessible in prison there? Because I know it's accessible here in the United States at times.
Yeah, it was. And people find this very hard to believe because being in Thailand where heroin is readily available, in a prison of 6,000 people, there was one woman that sold heroin. The first day I got there, that was the first thing I wanted to know. Where can I buy drugs here?
So was there ever a moment while being there that you had that aha moment, the light bulb went off and you just said, this is not the life I want to live?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, as soon as I got there, all I wanted to do was be numb. I didn't want to think about my circumstances. For months, I just continued using heroin. I remember it clear as day. I'd been unlocked in the morning. I'd come outside. I was sitting down on the dirty, filthy ground, and I just sat there looking around at my surroundings. I was looking at the other women. I was looking at how we were living. And it was in that moment that I was like, Holly, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. Look where you are. Look what heroin has done to your life. You're fucked. You fucked your whole life. And that was a really powerful moment for me because in that moment, I made the decision to never, ever, ever touch drugs ever again. And I never have.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah. And a lot of people say that, Keisha, like, how was it that easy? Well, I don't think it was that easy because I've been living this life for so long of heroin addiction, of prison, of loss. You know, my mother died of a heroin overdose when I was 21 and I was in jail. Wow. So, you know, a lot had happened in those years and I was just done. I was just over it. So I wanted to make the best life I could for myself and I wanted that to be straight, not in a drug haze.
Right. Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that even though people thought it was easy, like you just one day, just like you said, woke up and said, I'm done. It took time to get to that point of saying, I'm done. It wasn't like you just used for one or two times and said, I'm done. It was a lifetime of destruction. It was a lifetime of many different things, it sounds to be. Yes.
You know, a lot had to happen to me to get to that point of like, enough's enough. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, oftentimes, I don't know. And again, I'm speaking on language I hear here in the States, right? And so I don't know what I'm about to say is universal in reference to way people think about people who are addicted to substance. But here, what one believes is that a person has to hit rock bottom before they stop using. Oh, is that the same thing there where you are? The mind concept, is that
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Because until you hit rock bottom, you're living a life that is obviously fun. You're happy doing what you're doing. Addiction hasn't taken much from you yet because it eventually will. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you know that to be true.
Yes.
You know, at this stage in my life, looking back, you know, I'll give people an example. You know, my mum died of a heroin overdose. I had to go to her funeral in handcuffs. That's another thing that addiction took from me, being able to say goodbye to my mother like a normal person. You know, about 4 years ago, my older brother died of a heroin overdose the day he got out of prison. That's another thing heroin addiction took from me, my brother. My younger sister died of a heroin overdose about 3 years ago. Another thing that heroin addiction took from me. So, you know, there's a lot that comes from addiction. It's not just prison. You know, you're losing your loved ones. You're losing your friends. You're losing your freedom. You're losing the ability to watch your family grow up, to see babies being born. to be able to go to a wedding, just all the normal stuff that people should be doing in life. I missed out on because I was a heroin addict and made stupid choices. Yeah.
You know, Holly, I sit here and I listen very intently on two different levels. One being a child of addicts, and another being an individual who worked in a population of those who were struggling day to day with addiction. And something that you said rings very true to me. What you said was the heroin took these people away from you, right? And what I often used to tell people when I would educate others on addicts and addictions, because as we know, sometimes people are very cruel because of lack of understanding of what someone goes through on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And what I will always say to people is this: the addiction is the issue. The addict is the person. Yeah. We all have issues, right? We all have issues. Yeah. They may look different, but far too often people are so judgmental of the person versus understanding what the addiction has done to the person. And so I hope that as people are listening to you openly share your life, what addiction has done to your life and your family members, I hope that they will pause just for that 1 second to realize once again that we all have issues. They may look different, but an issue can affect all of our lives in so many different ways. But not only our lives, it can also affect other people's lives that love us or that we love as well. And that's what I hear you saying as you speak about that.
Oh, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, 100%. You know, and one thing I do want to bring up, you know, I get a lot of feedback from when I do, you know, podcasts and radio and stuff. People put a lot of shit on my mother. Oh, how could a mother do that? Well, my mother was a lovely lady. She was the best. She loved me unconditionally. She was the one person to always be there for us kids. My mother had a very horrible upbringing. So my mum did the best she could with what she knew. You know, we'd never known drugs. We'd never seen drugs. We didn't know people who had been in prison. This was all new to us when my mum first met this guy. So people have to understand, my mother was very naive to drugs, as we all were. If my mother had have known that having that snort of heroin that one time would lead to what it would, to what it did, there's no way in the world she would have said yes that night. There's just no way. But we didn't know. You know, that's one thing I want to make clear.
And I'm going to say this. It's extremely important. And I want to pause for a second to be very transparent. When I do this podcast, it's not only for my listeners, right? I know that these messages are going to touch other people, but there has been many episodes that I too have been touched. And it brings me to emotion. And this, just what you said, brought some emotion to come up with me, right? Yeah. I start, as you're talking, I began to feel some tightness in my own self because what you said was so my life, right? Yeah. I found myself oftentimes telling people this about my mother. My mother was a little naive country girl from West Virginia who endured some trauma. Right? She didn't ask for it, but she endured some trauma. And because of the trauma, she ran, right? She ran from the country of West Virginia, the hills of West Virginia, to the big city life of Detroit, Michigan. Yeah. Beautiful woman, talented lady, employed. But what happened was there was somebody that recognized that my mother was naive and that she was damaged. And she didn't recognize all those things, right? And so with that, just what you just said, Holly, unfortunately, it just took that one time. It took that one time for her to be introduced to a drug, which I'd shared with you before when you and I first talked, which was heroin. And unfortunately, it got the best of her life. But then here comes Keisha, myself. What I always say to people is that, just what you just said, I know my mother loved me. Right. She did the best that she can do with her circumstances that she was faced, because, again, I didn't know her trauma. But as a mother, she did the best that she can do. Unfortunately, the addiction took control of her ability to provide for me the way I know that she wanted to provide for me and the way that she was raised to provide for me. And so I'm so happy that you shared that, because you're exactly right. People on the outside sometimes will criticize what they don't understand, or what they don't want to understand. And so thank you so much for sharing that, because, again, I can relate because I
Yeah.
am a product of an addict, and I do understand that my mother loved me unconditionally and did the best that she can do with her circumstances.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's very frustrating, Keisha, in regards to people judging others, who are going through hard times with addiction or whatever it is. And I say to people, the people that are judgmental, just sit back, because this could easily happen to a member of your family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 110% sure that you would change your mindset and your opinions about this issue if you were close to somebody that was going through it. People are very judgmental when they're away from a situation and have no idea about it. And that's frustrating to me.
It's very frustrating, and I used to say this all the time, and I still say this to the day, and it's not to minimize anyone's lifestyle experiences of that sort, right? But let's really understand that addiction just doesn't mean a hard substance.
No.
Right? Addiction means anything that takes control of your day-to-day being, that has more control of your life than what you have of your own, right? And so I'm going to take you here for a second, Holly, and I hope that I don't offend you or anyone else that may be listening who find this story to be compelling because they may be dealing with their own issues with addiction. But I used to have an addiction to Pepsi, right? And one may say, well, that's totally different. And I will always say this. I'm not saying that one is worse or one is not as bad as the other. But what I know was this. I would hide the fact that I was always drinking Pepsi from my family.
Yeah.
I would hear them say what it was going to do to me, as I knew it can cause problems. This will always be my answer. If I continue to drink Pepsi, there's a possibility that I may be on kidney dialysis or other things that can affect my health. And guess what? My family will have to help me along the way. And so I share this, Holly, to say, again, I'm not minimizing anyone's experiences, but when we begin to criticize people and or judge people because of their addiction, I always say, look in the mirror and ask yourself, are you addicted to something? Because the reality of it is you may be, whether it's shopping, sex, food, chocolate, whatever it may be, so we all have to be careful about placing judgment when we don't understand people's lives.
Oh, 100%.
You shared with us that there was that light bulb that took place when you were in prison. You said, Holly, look where you are. Look what's around you. You stopped using. Take us to the moment when you was released. Talk about that life where you are today.
Yeah, so I actually thought I would have a hard time reintegrating back into society. So when I got out, I was so surprised that it was so easy for me to just get back into life. It was like I'd never been away, to be honest. Yeah, look, I got out. I just went about getting my life back on track, which everything was going great for about the first 2 years. Then I started waking up in the mornings crying. Now, that had never happened to me before. I was like, what's going on? Like, what's happening to me? I'd be driving in my car and just start crying. I didn't want to talk to people on the phone. I didn't want to have people come over. I just wanted to wrap myself in this little bubble. And that's just not who I am. I actually thought I was going crazy. So after a few weeks of this, I went to see my doctor and he said, Holly, look at what you've been through in your life. You've got severe post-traumatic stress and you've got depression. And as soon as he said those words, it made sense. But I'd never considered that. Never considered it for a moment.
Right.
So when he said that, I was like, oh, shit, yeah, okay. That does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So he got me on medication. I started to go and do counselling, which I did for many months. I got to the point after being on medication for a couple of years that I was fine and didn't need it anymore. So I went back to the doctor. I said, look, I'm fine now. I want to get off these antidepressants. How do I get off it safely? And he said, look, I don't recommend you do. And I said, well, I'm going to. So can you tell me how to do it safely? So, got off the antidepressants. I thought I was doing great. My friends and, Stephen just sort of said to me one day, look, I think you need to go back on the medication. And I was like, why? And they're like, you're a real bitch. And I was like, what? I couldn't see it myself.
Right.
But all the people close to me, they could see what I couldn't. So I went back to the doctor. He started laughing when I walked in, and he said, "I knew you'd be back." And I said, "Well, I didn't. I thought I was fine." And he was like, "Look, this is something that you may have to be on forever." And I accept that. I'm on it today. I will be on it till the day I die. And I'm fine with that because it's helping me, and all the therapy I did as well. I'm a huge advocate for, counselling and therapy and stuff. It's amazing. Yeah, so to get to where I am now, it has been a lot. But, I'm in a place now where I'm the happiest I've ever been. I work with an organisation that we have clients that are on charges through the court. We're a voluntary program where they can come to us for 12 weeks. They get individual counselling, whatever help they need, whether it's, they need help with ID, they need clothing, they need food, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So me having lived the life I have, I'm employed as a peer worker, which means I've had the lived experience. Mm-hmm. And my job every day is so rewarding because people are like, "Oh, my God, I'm so glad you're here. You can understand what I'm going through." And I can because I've lived it. I've done a lot of work to be able to live the life I want to live these days, to be able to help people who are going through similar things to what I did, or maybe they know somebody who's going through similar things. I truly believe what I'm doing now is what I'm meant to be doing. I should be dead 10 times over, teacher. I really shouldn't be here, but I am, and I feel I'm here for a reason. And life today is great.
And have you found that the work that you now do is a piece of healing for you as well, right? Because what we know is that with grief and healing, they run parallel, right? And so do you find that the work that you're doing to help other people allows for you to continue to heal throughout your life?
I do. And I think the other thing that also helped me a lot was writing and publishing my book. That was a huge form of therapy for me as well, in a lot of ways. And that's why it took so many years to write it and to get it published, because there were years when I couldn't even look at it. I couldn't write because it was too traumatic. I didn't want to go back to that place in my head. Mm-hmm. But, I soldiered on because I knew that this book had to be written. And, eventually I was like, okay, I'm done. This needs to be published now. So that was a really big form of therapy for me as well. And people that have read my book, it's a relatable story to so many, I also do talk, and I did a talk in a maximum security prison over here a few weeks ago where they have one unit in the prison, which is a rehab unit. So these guys go through a program for 9 months. Mm-hmm. They graduate at the end and they have like a ceremony. I was invited to be as a guest speaker. After I finished that talk and started talking to the guys, they were like, "Oh, my God, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. Like, we can't believe that you actually went through all that. Like, look at you now." Mm-hmm. And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." I said, "People don't believe it when I tell them what I've been through." And I said, "But this is just another bit of hope and motivation for you guys, because I used to be you. I used to sit where you're sitting now. Like, if I can do this and get out from under that, you can too. There's nothing stopping you."